speaking. You've done a lot of reporting into Trump world, and you were one of the first reporters to kind of identify that he was a serious candidate for the VP slot, and how Trump was impressed with him. Why ultimately do you think Trump picked him?
So it was down to two. I mean, this guy is 39 years old. He's about to turn 40 in about 2 weeks. He's a first-term senator. I think the reason that he's so important in Trump world in the first place is that he's seen as Trump's best ally in the Senate. Remember, Trump's biggest problem last term was that he didn't have huge Senate allies, and JD in about a year emerged as his best one. And when it comes to the VP, it came down to him and Burgum. Before the debate, for a number of weeks, his team and Trump really liked Burgum, and then after Biden's, let's just say, abysmal debate performance, just a window into Trump's thinking, he got he was very positive about his chances, probably more so than he should be. And he figured, well, now I no longer need to be thinking about who would best strategically help my campaign, and I can afford to choose someone who perhaps I like to spend more time with, who's seen as a torchbearer for the MAGA movement, and that's why he ended up choosing JD. I mean, from what I heard, it had been more than a week since he's wanted to choose JD, and so JD it was.
What do you expect? How do you expect them to use him? What are we going to see from JD Vance this fall on the campaign trail? Will he be focused in some areas? Will he be all over the place? What do you think? What can you tell from what they've told you?
JD will be parked in Pennsylvania. He will also be parked in Wisconsin and Michigan. These are blue wall states. These are also the 3 states that the Trump campaign has indicated are their top 3 swing states. And so, of course, JD's personal story is one that's really important. It's one that stands out too, and something that we'll hear him, keep harping on starting tonight. So I think that's the expectation from JD. Of course, Trump wants him to be on TV as he has been, to be loyal, to do all of the things that anyone who has a chance in Trump world needs to be doing to continue to stay in Trump world.
Alex, you've done a lot of reporting on the Biden campaign, the Biden White House. You obviously have led the way in reporting about the concerns about Biden's age. What do you see? How do you see them dealing with JD Vance? Has there been a response? I know they have come out of the gate swinging, basically immediately attacking him. What is that about, and what do you expect to see in terms of how they treat JD Vance?
I think they would have responded to JD Vance the way they would have responded to any VP pick, which is basically saying that this was a MAGA extremist, a MAGA radical that wanted to outlaw abortion. The thing that's different about JD Vance is it makes that job a little bit easier, given that JD is so aligned with Make America Great Again, the Trump movement. But to Sophia's point, I mean, the sort of doubling down on the message and keeping him focused in these blue wall states. I mean, the thing that's sort of underappreciated is so Trump's fairly far ahead in Nevada, Arizona, Georgia. And those are all 3 states that Biden won last time. So let's say Trump wins all 3. Let's say he flips all 3. That still only puts Trump at 268 electoral votes, and Joe Biden would win the election. So Trump needs to win one of those 3 blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin. JD, given that he is from the region, given that, he certainly has spoken and written a lot about sort of the effect of deindustrialization, shipping jobs, out of America, how it has affected the community. I think that's why you're going to see, as Sophia put it, they're going to park him in Pennsylvania. They're going to park him in every single dying steel and coal town throughout the Midwest.
And from the Biden-Harris campaign's perspective, how do you think they'll treat JD's background? He's on video saying some pretty nasty things about Trump. How do you think that are they coming out immediately with that? And how does that play into their strategy about how they portray Vance?
So the Biden-Harris campaign is much more focused on his current views than his past views on Trump. I think part of that is because JD has been a pretty, he's an effective speaker, and basically he's presented himself as sort of with the zealot of a convert and said, listen, I was skeptical of Trump too, just like all of you were. And now I am converted because he's good. He is in some ways trying to give permission to other people, which I think is part of the reason why Biden's team is not focused on that. Instead, what they've tried to focus on in terms of past comments, you've seen them really focus on his past comments about abortion rights. You've seen him very much focus on his just any real comments. Like, I think the Trump stuff will be there, but it's really about his current views, and they are going to try to just tie him as a quote-unquote MAGA extremist. And that's what they're really going to focus on. Not trying to paint him as a hypocrite, but trying to paint him as someone out of line with the majority of America.
And with the abortion issue, that's an area that's untested for JD. I was in Pennsylvania covering the 22 Senate race when JD Vance was elected and running against Tim Ryan. And 2 years ago, Tim Ryan decided that he wanted to hit JD on the economy. And so the Democrats didn't run any ads on JD's abortion stance. Now that's very different. And already we're seeing, Biden's rapid response team hammering JD on past comments on, supporting a national abortion ban.
So we've seen this week a big flip in the unity disarray equation between the Republicans and Democrats. The Republicans really emphasizing unity behind Trump. Last night, a parade of people Trump has defeated were at the mic. It's as if planned. But the response to the Nikki Haley speech was there were cheers, there were also boos, and the fact is that 15, sometimes even 20%, depending on the primary, Republicans were out there going out to the polls knowing their candidate would not win that primary and voting for Nikki Haley. They made a statement, and Democrats certainly were paying attention to it. Republican Party is certainly paying attention to it. So it's an exaggeration, I think, to say that the Republican Party is 100% united. Do you think there is, how will they reach out to Haley voters moving forward here? A lot of skeptics, some converts perhaps. How does the situation going on with Democrats affect all that?
First of all, from what I'm hearing, it was a chore to get Nikki Haley out there to speak. There were many, many phone calls, and finally she agreed, and they're very happy about that. I think there's two types of Nikki Haley voters. One type, they are never Trumpers. They are voters who, will not be voting for Trump. Those are the voters that the Biden campaign will go after. There's also just the traditional conservative Republican who may prefer Haley's style, and those are the voters that, will probably follow Nikki Haley and Trump to vote for Trump in November. I think the Biden campaign is very clear-eyed about this. They know because Nikki Haley is endorsed, they're not getting the second half, but they're focused on, the never Trumper voters. And, that's why you see them still quoting Nikki Haley in an effort to keep the door open for her voters on the Biden side.
I'd also just add to that the Biden campaign has ramped up its efforts towards sort of those, especially suburban Republicans, thinking about like the Atlanta suburbs, the Philly suburbs, the Pittsburgh suburbs, Milwaukee suburbs. And they rolled out Adam Kinzinger. They've also had, some of the officers related to January 6th be top surrogates. They have really tried to ramp up that effort. I will say, though, that a lot of these Republicans are sort of shocked it took them so long. Like, this was low-hanging fruit. If getting Adam Kinzinger to endorse is probably a very low-hanging fruit that you could have done a year ago, 8 months ago, but instead it was only a few months ago. Chris Christie has been very public in saying, Biden has even called me. Biden's people haven't even called me. Like he's another sort of person that would have cachet among maybe some of these voters that you need, these people that were voted for Nikki Haley in protest. And so the question is, the Biden campaign has been a little bit behind the ball in terms of its outreach, and Biden has as well. And does that change, especially after this convention? The combination of like every candidate gets a convention bounce usually, and they also get a VP bounce. What happens with a convention bounce, a VP bounce, and an attempted assassination bounce? And what do those polls look like in 10 days? That could add an extra sense of desperation to the Biden campaign.
Sophia, you've written a lot about the ground game, that the differences in the ground game between the Republicans and Democrats. Do you think, and you've explained the differences if you would, but do you think that will play a role at this stage, or has so much happened since they've set up these campaign offices? The Biden team in particular was proud of its ground game, and the Republicans were sort of in disarray, and with the Trump takeover of the RNC. How does that play out? Does it matter as much anymore as they thought it might?
So what I've seen on the ground covering this campaign since the very onset is that during the primaries, the Trump campaign put a lot of effort into doing what they call moving the mud, which is, being in the states, gathering their volunteers, doing gold hats for precinct captains in Iowa. I mean, they did that very meticulously. They spent a lot of resources doing that, and they did that well. In part because they feared Ron DeSantis and they feared other competitors, and they wanted to make sure that there was not an Iowa 2.0 that happened in 2016 where, their fairly immature campaign did not have a presence. Now that they've got the nomination, Trump, I think, instinctively has this belief that he will turn out voters, and he's been more obsessed with what they call election integrity. And so that's a part of the operation that the RNC has been building out like a political ground game. That's how it's been described to me. So they're looking to get 100,000 volunteers in the form of poll watchers and lawyers. They want 5,000 in each swing state. I mean, those are huge numbers. That's a sign that that's where the Trump campaign and the current RNC's resources are going. And it looks very different than the quote unquote moving the mud that was happening during the primaries. And I think it comes from the top.
Just one little anecdote to add to what Sophia said in terms of the sort of the attitude with regards to how they see the ground game in Iowa, where they invested a lot of money, they moved a lot of mud. The Trump campaign won 98 out of 99 counties. The person that was in charge of the 99th county was fired just after the Iowa caucus. And that was to send a message, like internally as well as externally, about sort of the expectations they have.
I'm not sure we have time for this, but can you get into the disarray in the Democratic Party? What is happening? I get a lot of questions about it. I'm sure you do too. You've had a front row seat to what's going on with Biden and the ratcheting up concerns about whether he's going to be the candidate, he's not going to be the candidate. What's happening, and what's the latest news today?
Well, if you're a Democrat, you have no good options right now. If you are concerned about Joe Biden being at the top of the ticket, the problem is that the original sin, if you will, was the fact that he ran at all, because it was a risk that his limitations, both physical, mental, would, there's something about age where you age a little bit at a time and then all at once. And as someone that's watched him every day, there was a point around last year where sort of the ramp became a little bit steeper downward. And then they limited access to him, to the press, and they didn't do the Super Bowl interview, and then we all saw what we saw on the debate stage. Now, in terms of what's happening right now, you have there are two things. The party is for lack of a better word, freaking out, but they all are sort of, so far, they have all been scared that if they come out super publicly and push him out, A, it's not clear that actually it's a better option, but B, even if they do, what if that just makes him dig in more? And then you have the worst of both worlds where you've come out publicly against the nominee and he's still the nominee. And part of the thing is about Joe Biden is Joe Biden's a very proud man. He's a very resilient man. He has this self-mythology, and there's some truth to it, that he's been counted out before by all the elites. And so that's why you see all these Democrats sort of tiptoeing around his ego. I mean, every single Democratic candidate that's come out, it's like 9 paragraphs of how great Joe Biden is, and the very last sentence is like, and I think he should get out.
Right.
And, you
Could
know...
you talk a little bit about what happened with Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton in 2016 that informs Biden's thinking today? Why people, he's so stubborn, why doesn't he just go, sort of that crew of thought? How does 2016 and what happened then affect what's happening today?
I think it's underestimated if you sort of understand Joe Biden's psychology, how traumatic the election of 2016 was, because he wanted to run. His son, Beau Biden, who died in May of 2015, wanted him to run, or at least Joe Biden felt that he wanted him to run. He didn't run, in part because he feels that Obama preferred Hillary to him, that Obama's aides preferred Hillary to him. And then in Joe Biden's mind, Joe Biden believes that he could have beaten Trump. And he felt guilty for not running, and he felt angry at everyone that talked him out of running. So if you're Joe Biden right now, and you're being told, get out of the race, and Joe Biden does not want to be sitting on November 5th, having not run, and then seeing someone else lose to Donald Trump. You know, as someone sort of put to me about this Obama factor is, like, he already used that chit once. You don't get to use that chit again. Like, you don't get to talk Joe Biden out of running again. And so this is sort of, if you're a Democrat that is trying to talk Joe Biden out of running, this is sort of the traumatic psychological experience you have to navigate around. And I'm not sure what you can say to Joe Biden that would convince him otherwise.
And the 2022 midterms are a factor here as well, right? Because everyone said the Democrats were going to get blown out in a red wave. What happened? How does that affect Biden's thinking?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, this sort of perpetuated his self-mythology of, like, always being counted out. Like, the 2022 midterms is actually just, like, with everyone predicting a red wave that never came, like, he sees that as a longer narrative of his entire life of being counted out. The kid with the stutter who rose up, the kid that was seen as sort of like a joke that becomes a U.S. senator, elected U.S. senator at 29, the guy that everyone dismissed in the 2020 primaries as a has-been, wins the nomination. And, I think it is part of the larger narrative in his head, and it's also part of the larger narrative of the people that are closest to him and the people that are advising him right now. And that's why you have a lot of Democrats concerned that Joe Biden is surrounded by yes men and people that are more worried about his feelings and believe in his mythology than they are about the rest of the party. And that's why you're seeing people like Adam Schiff, probably the most prominent national Democrat so far, to come out and say that he thinks Joe Biden should step aside.
I know you hate predictions. I know you don't make predictions. But right now, as we sit here a month from the Democratic National Convention, what do you think the next month looks like in terms of what Democrats do with this troubled candidate on their hands, frankly? What do you think that looks like just in terms of the run-up to the convention?
I think it's going to get much messier because you're going to likely see some worse polling come out in the next 2 weeks. And then I think that you already have donors that are turning their attention elsewhere to Senate races, to governor's races. And then you're going to have like a nominee that's losing out on money. You're going to have the Republican get more and more money. You're going to have bad polling. And then you're going to have polling showing that the down ballot candidates are suffering for having a weak general election candidate. But what does that do to change Joe Biden's mind? I think I don't know. It seems I just don't know what could change his mind. The only person that has enough cachet with him would be to sort of maybe change his mind is Nancy Pelosi, but I don't even know if that's enough. And he does not seem to me a person that wants his mind
last question for you both. You've covered the Trump campaign, the Biden White House and campaigns. What's one of the most interesting things you've learned about each?
I think it's superficial on the surface, but the extent to which Trump and the people around him obsess about visuals, like I saw it on the plane. Trump gets on and he starts talking about the appearances of reporters, the people around him, talking about people's size and whether, you would want to fight somebody. You saw it in terms of debate prep, as recently as the debate. The Trump campaign prepped not just policy, which was widely reported, but they also prepped the visuals. And that is why you saw the expressions that Trump made to Biden when Biden was stuttering. Trump goes, turns his head. I mean, that made a big difference to American viewers who are watching on TV. And, I'm in my 20s, and so much of how people tune into politics is now in short bursts on social media. And unfortunately, it is those visual moments where the scripts happen, or the contrast is made, that gets really widely circulated. And so, having covered this campaign, as well as last year of the White House, you see that, there is a reason why Trump and his people obsess over, the visuals. It's not just because he likes people out of central casting, although that's a big part of it.
Alex, same question.
The first thing, honestly, that came to mind is sort of the depths of the Biden family crisis that was happening when he decided to run in 2020. I covered the Hunter Biden's gun felony trial last month. And the most interesting part wasn't really the details about the gun and the drug use as much as just that, to put it plainly, if you want to set the timeline. So the detail that when Joe Biden ran, both of his adult children were struggling with drug addiction. His daughter-in-law had only recently gotten sober from crack cocaine, and had been taking care of his grandkids. The gun incident happens in October of 2018. Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, goes to a MacBook store in Wilmington in April of 2019. They're holding interventions throughout that winter. Joe Biden gets in the race on April 25th, 2019. Hunter Biden gets married to a woman that the family hadn't met on May 17th, 2019. Joe Biden has his first announcement rally on May 18th of 2019. The learning sort of the depths of this crisis the family was in, the family believed that a presidential campaign would actually in some ways make them stronger, bring them together. But the sort of nastiness and viciousness of modern politics has really torn through that family in I think a very sad and tragic way, and sort of learning at sort of that tension between, personal ambition and the stakes for the country, but also sort of the sadness of where the family was and how that's affected them since. I don't know, it's just something I keep thinking about, having listened to all the witness testimony, and it surprised me even.
Thanks, both of you, that was just really fascinating. And I did learn a lot because I hear this every day, but I hope you did. Thanks.